Broadcasting to you from an undisclosed location deep within the Swamplands, this is Tales from the Swamplands, an old swamp-styled radio show curated for your contemporary capacities. I'm Benjamin Gaunt, author, disc jockey, speaker of truths, purveyor of fanciful fallacies, and all-around scholar of our dear metropolis here in the Swamplands. Welcome back, dear listener, to another episode of Tales from the Swamplands. How y'all faring out there? It's all good? I know you can't really talk back, what with this being a one-way transmission. It's a strange contract we've made, isn't it? Or more like a sign-up sheet on a bulletin board. But you're not signing up for anything, really, except for listening to me gab on and on. What was I talking about? Oh, right. A perfectly intentional segue. We lack structure in our episodes each week around a specific topic. And by we, I mean me, by my lonesome in an undetectable bunker. Well, this week's topic is distractions. See, that was totally intentional. Now, distractions come in all shapes and sizes, like bugs or tummy aches. Sometimes you invite them in to have dinner with you, and before you know it, your roast is in flames. Other times you're trying to help a nice old lady across the street. Well, she shows you a mystic gem, says she's got a storage locker full of them, nobody to give them to. And the next thing you know, you're wrapped up in twine and slathered in sap in a dumpster outside a Sloughtside delicatessen. Not that I know anything about that. But distractions can be welcome or unwelcome, and sometimes the line between the two can be a bit hazy. I'll give you an example by way of a story from the headlines. If you want a wider coverage of news, watch a primetime talk show with a host like, say, Roger Stillwell. Just kidding. He's a sycophant, a waxy idol, and worst of all, he's insufferable. No. If you want a variety of unbiased news stories outside the main channels, check out The Lantern Cap Chronicle. They're well-researched, unbiased, and less fantastical than me and my musings. Anyways, on to our story. The city of Lawsett has decided to offer free subscriptions for all its citizens for the popular streaming service, Weaver. Which is great, right? If you got a tablet, a screen, or any other sort of visual tech, you'll have access to all sorts of news and entertainment. But here's the kicker. They'll only be offering a basic curated selection of channels, which is fine, right? Better than nothing, especially for free. So many citizens once without the ubiquitous streaming app can access it now, even if only a subset of the countless channels it has to offer. But are they the most popular channels that'd be more likely to be watched and thus offered freely? Possibly. My bet is that the channels will be carefully selected to offer the minimum crafted content for the average Swamplander. So no lantern cap, no siree. But you can bet your booty that some trash like, say, Roger Stillwell will be splashed up on the front page like some shining amber idol. And the rest of the selection will prove the same. Fun stuff, sure, but nothing gripping or thought-provoking. Just a distraction. And sure, lots of people could use distractions. Life's hard in the swamp. Harder every day. It's a long hill to climb. It's easier to roll down till you don't got any further to go. Eventually, you can't even see the top of the hill. All you know is which way's up since, well, gravity. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's hard to make time to climb the hill, and there shouldn't be any judgment for anyone who finds themselves further down than they'd like to be. Anyways, distractions. We'll cover them a bit more throughout the show today. For now, we'll move on to another tale from the Swamplands in one of our regular segments, Into the Mire. This week's tale will take place in the Kaleidoscope, the entertainment hub of the Swamplands. It's home to all sorts of theaters, competitive catching arenas, and film studios for the aforementioned streaming channels. A plethora of distractions. Though, in this case, are they for the better or worse? Focus is a funny thing. It's easy to feel out of focus in life. Like a bit player in a grand play, or an extra at a bus stop in a major motion picture. Who watches us? Who cares? What do others truly think of us? Are we a huge part in others' lives, or is the spotlight oft farther away than we'd like it to be? Maybe, sometimes, it's a saving grace. Be it the leery lenses of the paparazzo, or the flashing lights of law enforcement in hot pursuit. You never know how little you want to be seen till the spotlights are burning bright. And yet, we dance. We sing and stomp and do all we can to feel like we're heard, recognized, adored. Take, for example, one Miss Cynthia Day, a would-be starlet on a soon-to-be meteoric rise. She's half of a classic bug and lady duo. She sings and dances, and her Katniss co-star prances about, flutters around, and serves as a platform for his partner's acrobatics. In an unexpected turn of events, they'll take center stage in a production run out of a small theater up in the Kaleidoscope. The play's got great previews, and even better word of mouth. Before she knows it, Cynthia will be making waves with all sorts of talent scouts. Just one good opening show, and Cynthia's spotlight will burn even brighter. Though, hopefully, not too bright. And now, I present to you, dear listener, a tale from the Swamplands. The Flame That Burns Bright. Somewhere in the Kaleidoscope is the memory of fire. Past the chromatic gossamer panels encircling the spire like so many colorful shards of ice is a road of hope. It is here that the hopeful pretenders of the prestigious Swampland theaters tread the boards. They hustle day in, day out for another chance to hone their craft and climb further into the light. A spotlight, the all-seeing lens of salvation, the beacon of wayward romantics. When the masses need a distraction from the terrors of the swamp, here do they rest their eyes on whatever, or whomever, has made their way onto the stage and into that shining light. Further up the Kaleidoscope from the more illustrious theaters of note are the smaller establishments. They're lesser known, sure, but their residents work just as hard as anyone else. They don't lack passion nor talent, more so money and prestige. But even those black boxes and cubby stages have their histories too, their legacies. Such was the case for one hole-in-the-wall theater. Its curving, swooping arches and stained glass windows sagged comfortably in its old swamp facade. It slumbered peacefully at the end of a street in a lesser-known part of the Kaleidoscope's theater district, alongside other sleepy, venerable playhouses. Its quiet mass rested in the purplish hue of twilight, with light notes of amber sunlight fading from its worn face. Down the alleyway beside the establishment was an open backstage door. Inside, one could hear the faint din of an argument. Two voices danced with one another, almost spitefully so in some sort of hateful tango. Before too long, a young woman made her way down the alley toward the backstage door. She was dressed to dance herself, though, in this case, literally. Flexible dancewear, headband, the works. As she approached the door, one of the voices from inside grew louder. Its formless swoops and turns became more discernible by the second, until it reached the door. The voice belonged to another young woman. Though a few years senior to the dancer in the alley, she spoke over her shoulder at the nameless enemy inside. This was the final flourish in her own dance, one of dissatisfaction and indignant independence.
Well, I don't care about sorries and placations, Harold. You can't fix what you willingly chose to break, you cowardly dung mucker.
As she stepped out of the theater and into the alley, she nearly ran headlong into the dancer. At the last moment, she turned, saw the dancer, and staggered out of the way and into a couple of trash cans. They fell over noisily as she stumbled, trying to right herself. In the process, one of her high heels snapped, and she fell against the opposite alley wall. The dancer went to go help the woman, but was instead given a firmly declining open palm, like that of a draconian crossing guard.
Nope. I don't need your charity.
Rhonda, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're sorry? Ha! That's a laugh riot. I'm sure you're delighted by this turn of events, You've been skittering after this for ages.
The dancer shuffled awkwardly, confused by the enraged Rhonda. Rhonda looked up from her busted heel with her own look of confusion.
He didn't tell you? Nothing? You just happen to be more important than...
Rhonda stopped herself and gave her face a couple light wake-up slaps. She took a deep breath, took off her heels, and spoke once more to the dancer, this time with a measured tone.
You should go speak to Harold and prepare yourself.
For what?
Oh, come on. You aren't dumb. See all this?
Rhonda gestured to the theater itself vaguely.
Well, it's yours now. In essence, Harold's done with a little old Rhonda Posh. Only days before opening night. So, get ready for your very own trial by fire.
After a moment of realization, Rhonda's wild smile returned once more.
Funny way to say it, huh? What with the history of it all? Funny, isn't it?
The dancer carefully engaged in Rhonda's pendulous musings.
What's funny?
Oh, trial by fire. You heard about the real one, right?
No.
Well, this here hunk of wood and stone,
She explained as she slapped a hand on it like a beetle salesman on a lemon.
it's been around for a real stretch, right? Ever since they first started flooding the scope with all sorts of playhouses. Well, they say there was a real mess of trouble happened. There was this director who helped build the theater, get it going. He and a few others had gone into making this a premier spot for productions, like down on the main drag. But they had their visions all crossed. His head was up in the clouds, right? The others, their heads were in their ledges. Bills, wages, what have you. Wasn't long before they locked horns over it. And soon after, the director did the unthinkable.
The dancer shuffled uncomfortably, squirming in her own skin. Rhonda could tell a mean fireside tale.
He tried to burn the whole place down. Nearly did, too. Half the backstage wall was engulfed in flames before they got it under control. But, of course, not before it took someone along with it.
Who?
The director. Kinda makes sense, right? In a poetic sort of way. Some say on late nights when you're practicing into the wee hours, you can still hear him, giving notes, stomping his foot in displeasure, or even striking a box of matches.
The dancer looked like a ghost herself, to the obvious delight of Rhonda, who took her heels and tossed them before the frightened greenhorn.
This place has a way of testing you. It gets under your skin. Or maybe he does. But that's just the tale, right? And now, it's your problem. Mine is...
She turned and looked down the alleyway in contemplation. The sun had just set, and the lights of the scope were already kicking on. Deep shadows were tinged with whispers of neon and gaslight.
out there. Good luck, Cynthia Day. You're gonna need it.
Rhonda ambled off into the common night. Cynthia stood in the alleyway, taking in all that she had heard. Her emotions were much like the myriad of panels dotting the scope, a patchwork. Fear, hope, worry, elation. If she was right about what Rhonda had been implying, then this could be... She resolved to let her mixed feelings mix no longer. First, get answers from Harold. Then the celebrations and worries could take turns battering at her heart. Cynthia made her way through the backstage door. A few moments later, she was greeted by a familiar voice. This time, it shone with optimism instead of apologies and vitriol. This dance of words would, hopefully, prove more fruitful than the last. It was as Cynthia had expected. Rhonda and Harold had some sort of falling out. He sent the star of the show packing. Then, only a few minutes later, began working with her understudy, Cynthia. Now, Cynthia wasn't wholly unprepared for the task at hand. If she had been, she'd have made a terrible understudy. Lines were memorized, rehearsals ran late, but the transition left a huge question mark in its wake. You see, this production wasn't your regular old stage play. it weren't limited to marital strife, social commentary, and a promised gun. It was full of song and dance, with the culmination of it all in a solo piece by the lead. Well, nearly solo. The star took center stage alongside a performing beetle. It was a notoriously difficult craft to dance with a bug partner, but it was a classic act, and arguably the most important part of the play. Cynthia wasn't unprepared for this either. She had practiced with her beetle co-star a fair bit, not nearly as much as Rhonda. She'd have to practically live at the theater working on the routine till opening night, only days away. But if she pulled this off, it could change, well, everything. It'd be a leading role in a daring performance, not unknown in the theater scene. And talent scouts would be there to see it. You could bet on that. Her first big chance at stardom. The spotlight was waiting. And before you knew it, it was the last night before the premiere. As others finished up their work, Cynthia settled in for the long haul. The act needed more polishing, and there wasn't enough time in the world to get it where she wanted. But that didn't mean she wasn't going to try her damnedest to get it close. The last vestiges of the rest of the troupe matriculated into the streets of the scope. Their work for the day was done. Hers was just beginning. A couple dancers in the chorus line stopped by Cynthia before heading out. She sat alone on the stage, adjusting the wraps on her feet and studying her choreography. The leader of the group stood arms akimbo before the soon-to-be starlet.
You're done. Come on, let's go get fat on fries and bad decisions.
Des, I still have so much work to do. Go on without me. We can celebrate after I bomb tomorrow.
Synth, you gotta relax. You've got this.
Maybe. I don't know. It's just... this place.
Cynthia peered around the theater. While smaller than some others, it had its own sense of regality, sense of self. Plenty of careers in the performing arts had began here. Some found great success. Others...
I feel like it's testing me. Watching, waiting for me to mess up.
Des put a hand on her shoulder.
Synth.
She was quickly interrupted by another in the group.
It is.
Kel's not now.
But it is. So they say.
Cynthia stood up, intrigued. Somehow the revelation that things were indeed wrong, and it wasn't just her, well, that made her feel a bit better. If not better, then at least sane-er.
What do they say?
Kel's, come on, not before opening.
She wants to know, okay? She deserves to know.
Is this about the fire?
The dancers looked to one another, half in relief and half in apprehension.
Yeah. You heard? Yes. Some.
Well, I'm not sure what specifically you heard, but they say that the theater still remembers.
The fire, that is, that almost burned it to the ground. They say it watches us, makes sure we're keeping it safe, in good condition and all.
Des chuckled, as did the others. If the theater was anything, it wasn't pristine. It could use some fixing here or there, some refinishing in a couple of places. Or even possibly a huge grant for restoration and a whole team to do it.
I hope that isn't the case or we're all doomed. This place could use a serious spa day. Or a spa month.
More chuckles from the group, but not without nervousness. If the theater did hear them, it'd probably be incensed by now.
That isn't what I heard.
Another dancer stepped forward to give her account.
May, what did you hear? Well, there was a spat, right? A love triangle. They were all co-stars. And one of them tried to drop a stage light on another one during rehearsal, and, well... The fire? Yeah. What started as thoughtless jealousy, well, the light did its job. Too well. Now, his spirit roams the halls, looking for answers, trying to apologize, to forgive. But now, it's too late.
The group wasn't laughing anymore. Des coughed and tried to break the ice that had frozen over.
Well, that's a lot of fun. If you ask me, it's all pranks, right? This theater's just as infamous for its real pranks as its tall tales. Come on, let's go meet people and drink drinks. Or vice versa, whatever you want.
I'm fine, thanks. Haunts or no, I've work to do.
Cynthia, don't you think...
Haven't you all distracted me enough already?
To this, the dancers tensed. There was an energy in Cynthia swinging about her emotions like a sword, and in the face of her new status and responsibilities, the others felt unarmed against such a weapon. They relented, leaving Cynthia Day to sharpen her choices.
Okay. Good luck. Get some rest. Big day tomorrow.
Yeah.
The group headed out the backstage door. Their voices could be heard from the alley. The tone was that of nervous, careless energy, all pent up and let out, a dance of freedom. All the while, Cynthia was left to her own verbal dance, quiet, nervous shuffling, that of mumbling to oneself, a solitary dance. She sat down again and pored over her notes mindlessly.
Gotta be bothering me with all that nonsense. I've work to do. So much work. Don't they understand? No. How could they? Nobody understands what it's like to...
She froze. Just off of one of the wings was the distinct sound of a single, swift scratch.
Hello? Anyone still back there?
Silence. Then, another scratch. She stood once more and stepped slowly over to the source of the sound. She stumbled slightly over her notes, but straightened up immediately after catching herself.
Hello? Kells? May?
The scratch repeated every few seconds. It sounded familiar, but as she was on the verge of naming it, she stopped herself short. No sense in getting spooked over secondhand ghost stories. And yet, she couldn't help shake the feeling that something wasn't right.
Harold? Is that you?
As she reached the curtain, she could hear the scratching just on the other side. She braced herself, leaned over, and began to pull it back.
Hello?
A hulking form leapt from behind the curtain.
Please,
A waist-high beetle burst forth and scampered joyfully to her side.
Lee, you chitinous lunk! You scared me halfway to the grave!
The beetle nuzzled against her hip as she pet its shell and caught her breath. It was black with bright green curves along its shell, similar to the swooping lines adorning the theater's facade.
What are you doing out of your crate? Oh, of course. I can't believe Sean left the lock off again. He single-handedly gives our tech a bad name. I don't know what he does to keep Harold from firing.
The scratch sounded once more. Cynthia froze and looked down at the source of the sound. Lee was rubbing his mandibles against the hardboard flooring of the stage.
Lee, are you kidding me? What did the others pay you to scare me like that?
Lee simply chittered and ambled past Cynthia to center stage. She shifted the curtain back into place and made her way to her beetle co-star.
Okay, so you want to run it again? Gladly. But watch your footing this time, all right? I can't have you stomping all over the place when I'm grapevining. Understood?
The beetle shuffled in place and scratched with his mandibles once again. Cynthia sighed and got into position.
Why do I bother? You never listen. Well, not when it matters. All right, let's take it from the top.
Cynthia reached down and pressed play on a remote by her feet. Music began playing from the speakers at the sides of the stage. She pranced, kicked, and leapt through the air. Lee shuffled from side to side as Cynthia leapt over him each time. She sang along with the backing track, and before long, she'd begun working up a mighty sweat. They ran it a few more times. As the song would come to a close, Lee would immediately begin scratching obsessively at the stage with his mandibles. He would only pause to run the choreography. Then, back to it. This repeated until Cynthia started running short of breath.
Lee, give me a second. I gotta take a breather or I'll run out of breath for a week.
And yet, Lee continued to scratch at the stage. The rubbing was so constant now that it threatened to tear at the hardboard protecting the floor.
Lee, come on. This floor ain't cheap as it is. What's wrong with you?
She tried to nudge his mandibles away from the floor with a foot. In response, he bumped her back heartily, nearly knocking her over. She caught herself and literally put her foot down on the matter.
That's it. You're going back in your crate. Come on.
Cynthia retrieved a lead from backstage and hooked it onto the beetle's harness. She attempted to tug at her co-star, but he refused to budge. Defeated, she unfastened the lead from his harness.
Fine. We can run it again. But then, you're grounded. So much as I can ground a beetle,
She retrieved the remote and pressed play. The music came out of the speakers on full blast. Cynthia covered her ears from the cacophony and attempted to pause the music. Lee ignored the roar and instead mindlessly carved at the theater floor. His mandibles made rough lines in the black paint of the hardboard. Cynthia mashed at the pause button until finally the music stopped. Her ears still rung from the din, but a few moments later, she noticed that the scratching continued, though, to her surprise, not from Lee and his obsession. Lee had stepped back a few paces and was now eerily still, motionless. Cynthia stepped toward her co-star slowly, before softly speaking aloud.
Lee?
In that moment, she heard one more scratch, then a snap, and a split second later, a dark shape descended from above. Cynthia instinctively leapt out of the way, just in time to avoid a fallen stage light. It smashed into the stage with a loud crash and shatter, sending glass and ironwood everywhere. Cynthia's heart raced, and her adrenaline kicked in something fierce. She leapt up from her prone position and called out into the seemingly empty theater.
Hey, what's wrong with you?
Her eyes shot up to the walkway behind the remaining stage lights. No movement, not a soul. She sprinted backstage, searching for any interlopers. Not a one. She checked the alleyway and all the various rooms and hallways backstage. Nothing. When she returned to the stage, Lee was nowhere to be seen. Just a shattered stage light that had landed
Right where he was scratching. What? Why? I don't understand.
She looked around the empty theater. Darkness, aside from the glow of the remaining lights.
Lee?
She heard a single scratch from backstage once more. A shiver ran down her spine. She leaned down and picked up her notebook, brandishing it as a weapon. Slowly but surely, she made her way to the source of the sound, and it took her to the bug crates. A number of bugs of various shapes and sizes were locked up here. Among them was a single black and green beetle, waiting in his crate for someone to put him to bed.
Lee, don't run off like that. What if you got out into the city? Then what? Busking for scraps? You're better than that.
Lee settled in and scratched no more. Cynthia sighed and put a hand on his carapace. It was smooth and cold to the touch, with slight ridges along its shell.
All right, get some rest. Big day tomorrow. For both of us.
She locked up his crate and made her way back to the mess. The fallen light still sat busted in the middle of the stage, its debris strewn all across it and into the first couple rows of the audience.
Great. Guess my work is far from over. Better get a broom. I'm just glad they don't use torchlighting anymore, or else...
A thought crept into her mind. The coincidence was upsetting, sure. But it couldn't possibly be...
This place is falling apart as it is. I'll give Harold a piece of my mind in the morning.
And with that, the fear was shut away once more, like leftovers in a sock drawer. Not good enough, but out of sight. But as Cynthia cleaned up the shards with her broom and dustpan, she couldn't help but think one last creeping thought. That the sweeping of the broom's bristles sounded like a soft, repeating scratch. Opening night. The energy in the theater had a particular quality that day. Motionless, and yet full of taut energy, like that of a predator or prey in the darkest of nights, just a few feet away, holding its breath, waiting for the next shoe to drop. Though, between the two, it remained to be seen which one was waiting in the shadows. If Harold had a guess, it'd be the malevolent energy of the waiting theater critic. So, a predator. Sure, they could be impartial, but oftentimes a reviewer just as easily take down a production as praise it. Cynthia brought up the fallen light to Harold, but none of the other circumstances surrounding it. She figured it'd be best not to spook anyone else before the performance. His response was apologetic, but turned very quickly into mollifying Cynthia rather than offering any promises of improving the situation. He simply addressed any symptoms rather than their root causes. Rhonda's frustrations began to make more and more sense by the minute. But in no time, the day flew by. Last-minute changes and run-throughs were had, the sun began to set, and preparations were made for the show itself. The marquee outside the elderly playhouse still shone brightly in the humid, swampland night. Cynthia peeked her head out of the backstage door and down the alleyway. A larger crowd than this corner of the scope was used to gathered outside the front of the theater. She dipped back in and made her way to the dressing room. Cynthia was greeted by a slew of cast members on the way, till she finally settled in beside her fellow dancers. Des was applying makeup while half making conversation with the star of the show.
So, how's the reception, hotshot?
There's a lot. More than I'm used to.
Yeah? Well, good. You've worked hard for this. We all have. It's nice to have a real audience for once, instead of some drunken creeps stumbling in and getting us mixed up with some other establishment of ill repute.
Des!
Honestly, though, it's happened more than once. Not a coincidence.
But you don't think that they're gonna be disappointed, do you? Maybe they were expecting Rhonda Posh, and instead they're getting
someone else just as good. Different, maybe, but you ain't no slouch, neither.
I appreciate it. It's just, what if they're coming because of the change? Like they know we can't manage to fill the hole in a couple of days, and they want to watch a wreck.
Des turned towards Cynthia and gave her friend her full focus. Then she stated confidently to the anxious actress,
Then they wasted their ticket and we rake in the dough. Look, you got the talent, you put in the work. You'll show them your worth, I know it. But you should know it too. You want to be a star, Cynthia Day? It's about time you started acting like it.
Cynthia felt the heat of confidence well up within her. She nodded in stern resolve to her friend.
You're right. Thank you, Des.
No need to thank me. You can make it up to me by crushing it tonight. I like making rent and having a stocked pantry as much as the next starving artist. You feel me?
All right. I'll try.
Des turned back to the mirror and worked on her eyeshadow with a faint smirk.
Don't try. Do.
All seats were filled in the now cramped theater. A myriad of people made their way into this little corner of the scope. Some of the theater goers looked like old swamp money from the tower's top levels or way out on Knob Hill. Others looked like they'd picked themselves up from out of the dumpster outside and scraped together enough mail to pay for a few tickets. But money was money, and Harold was assuredly aware how much was likely coming their way. And otherwise, little else. Cynthia, on the other hand, was focused on other things. While the faith in her own abilities had finally solidified, less so did the unexplainable worries darting like shadows at the edges of her mind. As she distracted herself with all sorts of lions, cues, block-ins, and the rest, the energy of the beast radiated in the dark of night mere feet away. Was it predator or prey? Friend or foe? Just as her focus was on the verge of shifting back into that realm of what-ifs and implausibilities, the play commenced. It went well enough. There was energy and talent abound, and Cynthia met the demands of stardom with aplomb. And yet, when she looked out at the audience, she felt a sort of sickening mania humming under the surface of the smiling patrons. It felt, to her, like a crowd of onlookers at a zoo, waiting for an orb weaver spider to wrap a struggling bug in a quickly spun cocoon. Did they have such blood in their eyes waiting for the show to fail? For her? But Cynthia Day barreled ahead. If she focused on the task at hand, little else would matter. Let's take a quick break from this tale to hear a word from our sponsors.
Feeling famished? Boy howdy, I know the feeling. But not anymore since I ate at Rochi's Burgers and Fries Family Restaurant and Delicatessen. The food at Rochi's is fast, fun, and affordable. And it's not made of roaches. Hi, I'm Ronald Rochi, owner, CEO, and grandson of founder Reggie Rochi. I've been in the restaurant business my whole life, and I can tell you one thing. Rochi's is the best food this side of the coffers, and that ain't no lie. We use only the best ingredients from the best ranchers out in the mudflats, and boy howdy, does it show. If you need more convincing, here are some testimonials from some of our satisfied customers.
Oh, the burger? It's pretty good. A little greasy, but not bad. I don't know what kind of meat they use, though. Maybe frog? Or mealworm? Actually, it kind of tastes like roaches.
What a review! And another.
I've had a lot of fast food before. This? Oh, it's definitely fast food. It's weird though. The burger and fries taste the same. Everything tastes the same now I think about it. Even the deli meats. And the fountain drinks. They kind of have this oily, roachy kind.
Another satisfied customer. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait, is the name not a coincidence? Are all their food products, including their napkins, made of roaches? Well, let me tell you this. No. The name is a family name that got changed when we moved to the swamp. Don't blame us. Blame xenophobia. If you want proof, see for yourself. Come down to any of our locations scattered throughout the coffers. You'll know it by the sign, an anthropomorphic cockroach serving a burger, saying, "Welcome to Roachie's Burgers and Fries Family Restaurant and Delicatessen. It ain't made of me." See you soon. Bye. I love you.
And in no time at all, the play had reached its final act. A few more big moments, and all that'd be left was Cynthia, Lee, and their final dance. The duo stood backstage, waiting for the cue to make their grand entrance. A stage tech whispered in Cynthia's earpiece.
All right, so that about covers it. Any questions?
She spoke through a low-profile mic alongside her face. Its channel was routed to the tech crew, but in a couple of minutes it'd be blasting throughout the theater.
No, I should be good.
Lee shifted beside her anxiously, bumping her lightly into the curtain beside him.
Actually, one last thing. You've got Lee covered, right?
Well, yeah, of course. What do you mean?
Well, he's been acting weird as of late. Not listening to me and being real clumsy.
Sure, but you know bugs can get overworked too, right?
Very funny, Sean.
No, seriously. You two have been burning the candle at both ends. 3, even, if that's possible. I don't want to say it's user error, but...
Cynthia bristled at this accusation.
You want to talk about errors? How about last night, when the stage light fell?
Yeah, I heard. Sorry that happened. Harold told me about it, but we can't budget for newer equipment until the show rakes in some...
And what about Lee's crate, huh?
What about it?
It was left unlocked again last night. Care to explain that?
That's not right.
No, it's not.
No, I mean, I didn't close up last night. Bill did. And he sent me pictures of his closing duties, cause...
Right. He's methodical.
Yeah, he's like that. All the bug cages were locked up tight. I can show you the pictures after the show.
No, it's fine.
Okay. Is there anything else I can...
Look, I'm about to go on. Can you just make sure Lee's taken care of?
Like, how?
If something goes wrong, just shut down his chip. I'd rather he take a nap during the performance than mess up mine.
All right. Hopefully it won't come to that, but whatever you need, just let me know and I'll stop him in his tracks. We can reboot him for a curtain call.
Good. Thank you.
Sure thing. You're just about on. Break a leg.
The voice in Cynthia's ear went silent. A pile of dancers barreled past her a moment later, heading off stage. Among them were Des and company. They gave her quick and quiet support as they whizzed by. Then, there was only her and Lee. The lights went to black. She began stepping forward when she heard a familiar sound behind her. A single, sinister scratch. Her head swiveled back to her costar. He hadn't budged an inch. Even though only seconds had passed, the pause in the proceedings felt like an eternity to Cynthia. She growled between gritted teeth to the beetle.
Lee, come on. It's time to go.
Still, no movement. A voice whispered from her headset.
Everything good? We're ready for you.
Almost. Lee's got cold feet. We'll be right out.
Okay, get to it.
We have to go. Understand? Lee?
Nothing.
Come on. I need this. Don't let me down.
Then, he shifted, and in one single swipe, he scratched his mandibles against the floor. Cynthia blew her lid. Any semblance of decorum, bravery, or strength she'd built up over the last few days was knocked down like toy blocks. She whisper-yelled at the beetle with her utmost restraint, just quiet enough that the audience would be hard-pressed to notice.
Lee, I swear to the light of the fold, if you don't get on stage right now, I'll wipe your chip and reset you to factory settings. Do you understand?
Lee froze. Then, he chittered and ambled on stage. Cynthia had somewhat regretted the lengths that she went to coax her co-star on stage, but any further guilt or reflection could wait for the after-party. Cynthia sighed and muttered to herself,
Finally. Whatever works.
After what felt like an extra intermission, the two made their way to center stage. Then, just as they got into position, the music began, this time at a reasonable volume. Cynthia thought,
Now, the rest.
The lights went up, and the duo began. Cynthia Day and the fantastic Lee hit the ground running. Spotlights followed their every leap, hop, and skitter. Cynthia bounded over Lee, climbed a couple feet up a set piece, and stepped down from it onto the beetle's back. Lee'd spin in place while Cynthia stood atop his carapace. She sang her heart out, the words filling the small theater like thunder in a broom closet. The audience's focus was wholly on the duo. Any semblance of bloodthirsty fervor bubbling under the surface seemed to wash away. To Cynthia, the crowd seemed enraptured by one thing. Her, the star. Then, as she was stepping down from the beetle's shell, she heard something. Somehow, through all the blaring show tunes, she could hear a distinct sound cutting through the din. A single, solitary scratch. She stumbled over her words a bit, but caught herself before she lost the thread. She gave a sideline glance at Lee and his mandibles, but the bug hadn't stopped his choreography. Then, she heard it again. Cynthia peered out at the audience, searching for answers. All eyes were upon her, a swarm of moths patiently admiring a distant flame. All, that is, except for those of a single patron. They were in a large coat and a trilby. Theirs was the look of the comically incognito. They messed around with something they were holding, only lightly glancing at the performance every so often.
That must be the talent scout, or critic with a notepad. How can I hear the scribbling over the music?
Cynthia lost focus and nearly tripped over one of Lee's legs. She leaned against his shell as she delivered a line. Then, inexplicably, Lee stopped dancing. He turned to face one of the wings, leaving Cynthia to fend for herself. Her heart sank. This was her one and only chance to make her big break, and everything was about to be ruined by a mindless bug. The audience began shuffling and murmuring. This gap was too long to let go. Something was wrong. Cynthia glanced at the throng once more. She could feel the magic in their eyes fade, replaced by what she could only imagine to be hunger, or failure for a spectacular tragedy. The supposed critics seemed to scribble more and more. Their only task now was to jot down as quickly as possible the tale unfolding before them. The early demise of Cynthia Day. Cynthia's impulsive side kicked in. If a tree were to fall on her house, she'd rather die trying to catch it than to let it run its course. She leaned against the beetle, fixing to wake him up from his stupor. He didn't budge. So, in desperation, she kicked him. It was with that one swift kick that everything unraveled. The next minute was a fever dream, like a factory explosion slowed to a snail's pace. The beetle turned to face his co-star. His eyes began to glow. Now, this wasn't unheard of in the least bit. One of the most common functions in modded bugs was for light. Their oculars are rewired to enable bioluminescence. So, in essence, headlights. But flicking them on mid-performance, that wasn't part of the plan. Cynthia froze in place, stunned. She spoke slowly over the headset to Sean.
Sean, turn him off.
Sadly for her sake, this hushed order was loud and clear over the speakers. The audience began murmuring in confusion and apprehension. Still, Sean responded to the distressed star on the stage.
I can't. What do you mean you can't?
This too was audible. The audience began shuffling in their seats. A handful of them began to get up.
He's ignoring his chip, his programming. Either his code's been rewritten or his instincts taken over.
Then, the other shoe dropped. Lee's headlights shone bright, blinding Cynthia with their brilliant glare. He swung the bulk of his mass at her like a jackknife cart. His shell slammed into her, sending the starlet flying into the nearby curtain. He then rushed to the front of the stage, his headlights shining like two rabid spotlights over the crowd. Their faces were visages of pure terror, caught like snapshots of intimate dread with each band of light passing over him. Lee swung his mandibles down against the edge of the stage, and in doing so tore at the mics along its lip. They shattered, flashing with colorful bursts of light with each clawburr. The speakers played out the destruction, blaring the harrowing screeches of feedback throughout the theater. Lee spread his elytra, just enough to extend two amber-colored wings. He took off in a flash, ripping through the air like a frenzied pond hawk. Cynthia regained focus a moment later. Her vision was blurry, head dizzy. But through her seasick stupor did she see the panic in the crowd. There were shouts, cowering figures, and guests making their way for the door. She rose to her feet, clumsily, and made her way to the front of the stage. Lee was flying circles above the audience and making half-hearted diving runs about the room. The fear of the utter chaos before Cynthia was quickly outweighed by a new emotion welling deep within her, like a boiling geyser. Fury. About her luck, her fate, what have you. If somebody was looking out for Cynthia at this point, they were looking to sabotage. She wielded her indignation like a flaming sword, pointing it to the source of her ire, Lee. She raised a hand at the uncontrollable beetle and bellowed,
Stand down, you petulant vermin!
The clarion call sent a wave throughout the audience, head swiveled to the source of the decree. Then, so did Lee. He hovered in the air above the crowd, facing Cynthia. She merely stood with her hand raised to the beetle, panting heavily. A sound cut through the tense standoff. A single, ruinous scratch. Her eyes fell to the source, an individual amidst the mob of onlookers. The figure in the coat had struck a gleaming match. Cynthia's scream caught in her throat. Before she could cry for help or damn all else, swift movement caught her attention. It was Lee, the runaway bug, her co-star. He had found his target. He plummeted towards the stage, toward the star in her outstretched hand. The combination of the spotlights and his headlights gave Cynthia a searing headache. She cradled her throbbing skull, till, an instant later, the beetle overtook her. He knocked her to the ground and pinned her beneath him. She screamed as the blinding light of the theater was overtaken by the eclipse of his hulking form. Cynthia heard a crash and gasps from the audience. She felt a hot, searing pain on her legs. More yelling from the mob. The light rimming the eclipsing beetle flashed brilliantly.
This is it? Why here? Why now? I wanted so much more.
And yet, she was fine. Not great. Bruises and the rest, but not devoured or mauled. Just battered, beaten, and some pain in her legs. But Lee's frenzy had halted the moment he landed on her. A half-dozen feet appeared around the beetle. They heaved something heavy over its shell, and the brilliant light faded. The shouting of the crowd had died down a bit, save for one voice yelling above the rest.
It's not fair. You can't toss me out with the trash, damn it. I deserve some respect. What?
This voice was a new wrinkle for Cynthia. The gaggle of feet alongside the co-stars counted to 3, then pushed Lee out of the way. The light of the theater returned, blinding Cynthia for a moment. Though this time, it was from the more mundane house lights. The various cast and crew surrounded Cynthia, peppering her with questions. Her head swam with them as her eyes adjusted to the room. The audience filed out more calmly than expected through the theater's exits, though a few attempted to push past a line of police officers at the front of the stage. They raised notepads and piled more unnecessary questions onto Cynthia's already full plate. 2 officers dragged a flailing woman in an overcoat through a set of double doors. Her eyes met with Cynthia's for a split second. It was like looking in a mirror, but one peering into the recent past. The eyes were full of fury, of fire. They held in them the same righteous anger that had plagued Cynthia only mere moments before. And in that moment, she knew who they belonged to.
Rhonda?
Cynthia held a bag of ice to her aching head. She sat on a folding chair in the middle of the stage, a scratchy blanket draped over her bare shoulders. The theater was considerably less crowded now than before. Only a handful of the cast and crew remained. The bulk of them busied themselves with repairs or moving the set. A voice droned on beside her. It vacillated between apologies and praise. To Cynthia, it sounded muffled, foggy even. She wondered if this was due to her throbbing head. She turned to look at its source. Harold was smiling, all waxy and sculpted. His concerns ended at insurance and lawsuits. Maybe Cynthia's ears were saving her from his insincerity or his half-remembered platitudes. Harold ended his long-winded performance with an upturned inflection, likely a question. Cynthia nodded vaguely, hoping it'd do the trick. He smiled widely, patted her on the shoulder, and sauntered off. A more welcome voice brought Cynthia back to reality. Des and friends made their way over to the starlet, their rattled compatriot. Des crouched before the seated Cynthia, getting down to her level.
Synth, how are you doing, my moonbeam?
May handed her a bouquet. Cynthia smiled earnestly, albeit weakly, and took it awkwardly in her free arm.
I've been better, but I've also been worse, I suppose.
Gels and May added their 2 cents.
That was
What happened?
wild. All right, you two, give the star some room. So, Cynthia Day, what did happen, as far as you can tell? Well, I'm not really sure. Lee had been acting strange since yesterday, and then this. I told Tech to shut him down if anything weird happened, but nothing doing, obviously. Why is that?
May chimed in.
I've heard tell from my aunt that bugs got 'em onto their own, and sometimes they can break the bonds of their chips, so to speak. Okay, I could see that. But he attacked me, right?
Des seemed unsure.
What? Des? I'm not so sure, hun. Sure, he knocked you about a bit.
Cynthia had her own look of incredulity. She lifted the ice pack from a bruised noggin.
A bit? Oh, you poor thing. Could have been worse, though. And the way he was acting was weird, but... But what?
Gels finished the thought.
He saved you.
Saved me? From what? I don't understand. Oh, jeez. Well, everything went haywire, right? Sure. Lee was knocking about and zipping around the room. But then, in all the chaos, she pulled out a flamin' coffer cocktail and lobbed it on stage. She who? You didn't see her? Posh. Rhonda Posh tried to burn the house down. Oh. Oh, right. They took her away. And good riddance, too. She almost beamed you with the bottle. You would have been toast. So, my legs... Oh, well, right. You got a little taste of the tamale. But you'll be fine. I've seen worse. Then what happened? Lee happened. He swooped in, knocked you down, and caught most of the blast. He saved you, and probably the whole damn theater. He did? But he... I know. He went bonkers. Nobody else was hurt, save for some bumps and bruises.
Cynthia looked around for her co-star.
Where is he? Is he all right? He should be. He got some bad scorching, but they rushed him to a repair shop. He'll probably be there all night. That's amazing. I thought he was a monster.
More than that came rushing back. The scratching, the match, her condemnation of Lee. And then...
Wait, what's the news like? Are we toast? Am I? There she is. Miss Cynthia Day, her name up in lights. Seriously, I don't want this fiasco to ruin... I'm messing with ya. Well, the play... It went well. We did great. Early reviews are mostly favorable. But it was kinda overshadowed by... Oh, right. Yeah, some people were pretty miffed. Harold was sweating sap in the green room, but the initial response seems to be... Seems to be what? Desi, you're a hit. Well, sorta. The common thread seems to be talking about you ad-libbing and all the ruckus. Stand down, you petulant vermin. Woof, that's harsh. They're calling you a fiery figure, flame tongue, etc. Des, their words, not mine. Just figured you want to know what you're working with. They seem to like you. Yeah, for all the wrong reasons. I bust my butt to catch up to Rhonda Posh, and all they care about is that I yelled at a beetle. My co-star. He saved me. Sure, but the deed is done. Ink is dried, check is cashed. This is what the public wants to see. The fiery Cynthia Day. Could be worse. What, and not make it big? Would have had another shot, but on my terms. I'm sure of it. No, I mean, you could be. Oh, right. Sorry. These past few days have been so stressful. Gee, I wonder why. Well, obviously, but I've noticed all these strange occurrences, and I was stuck on what people were saying about the theater. Oh, Synth, I'm sorry if we spooked you. Yeah,
Sorry,
I'm
please,
sorry about
please
that.
forgive us.
No, it's okay. You don't need to apologize. I wouldn't have made it this far if it wasn't for all of your support. So, thank you. I just wonder why Lee was acting weird if he wanted to protect me. Like, maybe he sensed something. Like what? I don't know.
A single scratch cut through the calm. A shiver shot up Cynthia's spine.
Did you hear that?
Dez's concern overtook her kind bravado.
Cynthia? Hear what? I'm not sure.
Once more it sounded. She turned and faced a wing off stage. It was a fair bit darker than the rest of the theater. Standing in its shadow was a tall, thin figure dressed in a tattered tailcoat. They faced Cynthia, unmoving. Then, after a heavy pause, the figure turned and stepped out of sight. Cynthia's focus held fast to the space the figure had occupied. He vaguely handed the ice pack and bouquet to Dez and attempted to stand. Dez took them, but stood up to give support.
Synth, you should probably sit. 1 sec. I gotta check something out.
Cynthia rose to her feet. There was pain, sure, but not too much. The questions drew her forward, leaving the pain behind. She lurched to the wing where the figure had stood. Carefully, slowly, she peeked around the corner. The figure stood in the low light, facing the back wall. They were frozen as a statue. Cynthia made her way a few feet closer, just close enough to speak to them, but no more. She coughed lightly. No response. Then, slowly, she spoke.
Excuse me. Can I help you? You aren't part of the production, and we're closed for the night. You can come back tomorrow.
The figure was static. Then, after a brief pause, they slowly turned to face Cynthia in the darkness, and they reached, slow as dripping sap, into their tailcoat, producing from it a box of matches. Cynthia's heart sank. Her legs felt wobbly as she spoke to the figure.
No. Please. Don't do this.
They opened the box gingerly and produced a single match. Cynthia began shaking her head. Her voice caught in her throat, paralyzed from fear. The figure held the match head to the box. They struck the match. The stranger held its flame up to his face, bathing him in the fire's glow. He was gaunt, eye sockets sunken like a skull. But what stood out most to Cynthia was the burns. They caked over in patches on his face, like fungus on a dying tree. Cynthia tried to scream, but nothing came out. She tried to run for help, run away. All she could manage was awkward stumbling. As she reached out to grab hold of the curtain beside her, the match went out. Then, like the light of the snuffed flame, he was gone. It's one thing to burn your feet on the scorched road to success. It's something else entirely to live within the light itself. Enemies, fanatics, apathetic passers-by, they all get their chance to chuck a torch into the pyre. And now, Cynthia Day finally has a taste of what it's like to dance upon its flames. We love to love, and we love to hate. It's passion. It's when our emotions become a salve, a flag, or a weapon. But it's which one we choose that makes all the difference. So it's in our best interest to govern ourselves to be more present about which one we wield. When we see those tireless hopefuls dancing in the spotlight, it's our responsibility to give them love and support instead of tossing them into the pyre. Then, and only then, can we distract ourselves by cozying up to whatever tale they're weaving next. I'd rather a number 5 if they're out of special sauce. Yeah, it's either way for me, but... Oh, hey, sorry about that. I was just distracted with this... I'm just playing. I'm here all by myself. Duh. But seriously, we got the picture, right? Distractions. They can be dangerous, but they can also be welcome. As benign as a book or deadly as a rattler's tail. But you know what? There's one thing in common with most of them after all. Be they distractions from a kind friend, a controlling body of governance, or the whimsical thoughts flitting around in your head. We all find ourselves at their mercy from time to time. We're beings of great curiosity. Why else would we shift focus from one thing to another without some sense of interest in the first place? No. People are assuredly full of interest. And it's a good thing, too. The world would be a quieter, more solemn place without people in it to marvel at it, study it, and get tugged around by its multitudinous offerings. I like it better this way myself, even with the troubles inherent. Anywho, I'm off to research what makes stink bugs stink so much. I already know the answer, but it seems as good a use of my time right now as anything else. May you make your tale what you wish it to be. This is Benjamin Gaunt, signing off. Good night.
Tales from the Swamplands was written, produced, and, well, pretty much anything else by me, Sam McGrath. Music was written and performed by Morphalia. You can check out their music on Spotify or any updates on most social media platforms at Morphalia. That's MORPHALIA. For any other updates to the Swamplands, you can follow me on most social media at the Swamplands or at talesfromtheswamplands.com. Thanks for listening.